Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest in our series of weekly virtual field trips from Cooperstown, New York, not too far from the place you see on the screen, the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. Today's program, Pop Culture Through Baseball Cards and Language. We do welcome you to the program. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Bruce Marcus, and I work in the Education Department. Glad to be your host for these programs that we've been featuring during the current health situation in America. Glad that you could join us to learn not only about baseball cards, but also how the language of baseball has made its way into everyday conversation in America. We're going to look at the origins of baseball cards. We're going to see how they've been tied to things like tobacco, candy, gum products. And perhaps most importantly, we're going to learn how baseball cards reflect trends in popular culture. Things like grooming and fashion, among other topics that we will explore today. So that's all going to be coming up. Before we get started, though, with our program, we'd like to do a short virtual tour. You can see a picture of the Hall of Fame and Museum right on your screen here. This is a photograph taken from out front on Main Street. The Hall of Fame currently closed. We hope that it will reopen shortly, sometime in the summer. Coming up, hopefully not too far away. It's a three-story red brick building full of exhibits about baseball and baseball history. We have a couple of theaters. We also have a library as well. Geographically, we are in the northeastern part of the United States. More specifically, we're in New York State. You can see the reddish arrow pointing at what is the Hall of Fame logo. And that is where Cooperstown is. We are in upstate or central New York. We're about a 4-hour drive from New York City, also about 4 hours from Buffalo, New York, about 4 hours from Boston, Massachusetts. But we are as different from a city as you could imagine. We are a small village, rural, upstate New York, very much the country. Here's a beautiful photograph from the sky. We see our beautiful Lake Otsego, lots of trees, rolling hills, some open fields as well. Our tallest building is all of 5 stories. So this is what Cooperstown looks like. We have a small population here. In terms of year-round, about 1,800 people live in Cooperstown, although a typical summer day, the population is higher than that. We do have people who live here just during the summer months. Probably in terms of summertime residents, we're about 2,400 people, but those who stick with us throughout the winter is about 1,800. And that's why we have exactly one traffic road that's the only one here in Cooperstown. Let's go inside the museum. Here is our plaque gallery. This is where we currently display the 329 bronze plaques representing each of our Hall of Famers. These are the greatest players, managers, owners, executives, umpires in the history of baseball. It's an exclusive club. Only the best of the best make it to Cooperstown. Heading up to the second floor, one of our most important exhibits at the Hall of Fame is Pride and Passion. It's about the history of African Americans who have played the game of baseball. We learn about segregation in the sport. At one time, black players not allowed to play in Major League or minor league baseball. So in 1920, the Negro Leagues, created by Rube Foster, to give the best African American players a chance to play the game at a high level. Now that situation would finally start to change 1947 when Jackie Robinson broke through the color barrier. We learn about Robinson's story. And the stories of other key African-American pioneers, early players like Bud Fowler, Moses Fleetwood Walker, and also the aforementioned Rube Foster, who was not only the man who started the Negro Leagues, but before that was a great pitcher and manager. Diamond Dreams, also on the second floor. It's an exhibit about girls and women in baseball. Women have been playing the game in an organized way since the 1860s, when Vassar College started up the first organized women's team. Some other colleges then started up varsity teams after that. We learn about the Bloomer girls of the late 1800s, early 1900s. We learn about the women of the All-American Girls League, which started during World War II. And then more recent pioneers like Maria Pepe, who in 1973-74 challenged Little League Baseball and was able to get the case, actually went all the way to Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Maria Pepe, allowing girls to play Little League Baseball, and that's the way it's been ever since. So we learned those stories, Maria Pepe and many others, in our Diamond Dreams exhibit. Up on the third floor, our newest exhibit, which opened up about a year ago, Memorial Day weekend of 2019, Shoebox Treasures explores the history of baseball cards and collecting. And of course, that is what we're going to be doing with today's program. Pop culture through baseball cards and language. Baseball cards, if we look at them, are actually an example of popular culture artifacts. And we have baseball cards at the Hall of Fame. We collect a lot of them. We've been collecting them for many years. Currently, the collection at the Hall of Fame and Museum is about 200,000 baseball cards. So this is part of our mission, part of what we collect. These artifacts, these baseball cards, they tell stories. They help us learn about a history, especially American history. Artifacts like baseball cards can connect people, especially people from different generations. They capture moments, and they also can reflect changes that take place in our popular culture. One of the sources we use to put this program together is this very fine book by Dave Jamieson. Came out about 10 years ago. It is called Mint Condition. And if you want to learn more about the history of baseball cards, it's a fascinating history, as I think you're going to find out today. This book comes highly recommended. All right, let's take a look at an image that we have here. And let's ask the students that we have joining us today, what does this image represent? What place, what event in American history? You see two men who each have guns. We see two different flags represented. Standard American flag, also the Confederate flag. So what we have here, yes, as some of you have chimed in the chat, it is indeed representative of the American Civil War. And the Civil War went from 1861 to 1865. Very difficult time in American history. Country very much divided. North and South, those in favor of slavery, those against slavery, other issues involved in this separation. It was a time that, as I said, did divide the country, tore us apart in many ways, not just in terms of the physical losses, the injuries and deaths that come with a war, but also the psychological difficulties that can arise. One of the things, though, that did happen during the war, some of the soldiers, when they had some downtime, they were looking to forget the horrors of war, at least temporarily. One of the things that some of these soldiers did to occupy their time was to play baseball. They would set up camps, they would play baseball games. And this actually did help spread the popularity of the game. It was more popular in the North at the beginning of the Civil War, but as the war progressed, baseball started to be played in the South and also moved a little bit out to the West as well. Here we have a quote from the New York Clipper newspaper from 1865, basically near the end of the American Civil War. And as the Clipper said, when soldiers were off duty, baseball, back then it was spelled with two words, not the one, or the, it was spelled with two words, not one like we do today. When soldiers were off duty, baseball was naturalized in nearly every state in the Union. So the game was being played in many different parts of the country. Now, when the war came to an end, one of the soldiers, one of the veterans of the war, from the northern side, the Union side, a man named Andrew Peck. He started his own business, and it was essentially a sporting goods company. He was what you would call a street salesman, and he sold sporting goods, sporting toys and games as a street peddler. He had a partner in this business, a man named Erwin Snyder. Now, in trying to promote their business, these two gentlemen came up with an idea, an advertising card that was used to let other people know about their sporting goods. Some people have called this the first baseball card ever produced. Now you'll notice I have a question mark, possibly the first baseball card. That is because we don't know for sure. Some say it's the first card, others say no, there were cards before then. It's difficult to pinpoint exactly when the first card. What we can definitely say is that this was one of the first of the baseball cards, and it actually proved very popular. Now, the card came out in 1869 during the first season of the Cincinnati Red Stockings. They were one of the first all-professional baseball teams. So on the front of the card, the Red Stockings team photo is shown. And then toward the bottom of the card, or the back of the card, there's some information about the Peck and Snyder Sporting Goods Company. Now, when Peck and Snyder came out with this card, they just thought it was a good way to advertise their product. They didn't think that people would be interested in collecting the cards, but they soon found out that that was the case. They put out about 5 of these different cards, and they noticed that some fans, some of their customers, wanted to collect all of the different cards. So it was then that they realized that the cards themselves were a product, and that the cards themselves were generating interest, not just in the company, but generating interest in this whole idea of collecting baseball cards. Well, other companies soon followed, particularly tobacco companies. And one of those tobacco companies was Allen and Ginter. In 1886, Allen and Ginter produced a set of baseball cards. Here's one of the cards featuring Hall of Fame outfielder Mike King Kelly. Now, essentially, what Allen and Ginter did with these cards was they included them in their packages of tobacco. For example, cigarette packages. If you bought a package of Allen and Ginter tobacco, you got the baseball card as a bonus. It was an add-on. There was really no extra charge for the card. It was just sort of an incentive for people to buy the cards. Now, or to get the card, I should say, free of charge. Now, it was not just adults that were interested in these cards, also young boys like baseball. They liked the idea of getting baseball cards. So in a way, tobacco companies like Allen and Ginter were actually targeting young children. And this was something that was offensive to some people at the time, but certainly would be offensive today. Could you imagine a tobacco company coming into your school during the school year, setting up a table and promoting and advertising cigarettes or cigars to youngsters like yourself, whether they be in elementary school, high school, even in college? That would probably not go over too well. There would be a lot of people rightly offended by targeting young boys and girls to buy tobacco products. Well, back in the 1880s and 1890s, you had a similar situation. There were people that were upset by this. In fact, in some cities like Charleston, South Carolina, they actually banned the sale of cigarettes and cards together. They would not permit this. Other cities allowed it, but some cities like Charleston said no. Tobacco company, if you want to sell your product, you cannot include baseball cards within it. So even back then, this was a source of controversy and debate. Despite this, other companies, tobacco companies, got into the business of producing baseball cards. For example, From 1887 to 1890, Old Judge Cigarettes, which was a very popular tobacco company, issued cards of both major league and minor league players. You can see that some of the cards were colorized, like the one of Cap Anson on the left. Others were issued in a black and white format. And you'll notice that right on the front of the card is the name of the company, Old Judge Cigarettes. So you bought a package of tobacco from Old Judge, you would get a baseball card included. Again, it was an incentive to buy their product, but it was also a way to promote the product as well by putting the name of the company right on the front of the baseball card. Well, tobacco companies got very competitive in terms of putting out baseball cards. They spent a lot of money. And the cards became really nice. Colorized cards with beautiful drawings, lots of nice artwork. And it got to be that it was very expensive for the tobacco companies to make these very nice baseball cards. It was almost becoming counterproductive. The companies were spending so much money on making the baseball cards that they weren't making as much of a profit selling tobacco. Eventually, what happened was the formation of a monopoly. All the major tobacco companies came together, and they formed the American Tobacco Company. So in the early 1900s, the American Tobacco Company was the only tobacco company that was out there, and they were producing baseball cards, but no longer having to compete against other tobacco companies. Well, in 1909, American Tobacco put out a very famous set of cards. They are known as the T206 set. One of the cards was of this man, Honus Wagner, Hall of Fame shortstop. And it would become the most valued baseball card of all time. There's lots of reasons for that. Wagner was a great player. Many have called him the first great shortstop in baseball history. Also, the card was very scarce. Turned out that when American Tobacco put out the card of Honus Wagner, they didn't really get his permission to use his image on the cards. He found out, and he told American Tobacco, "You no longer have permission to produce cards with my image on the card." So this resulted in a short printing. So not as many of the Wagner cards came out as did cards of other star players in the T206 set. Well, sometimes when you have a short supply, that can increase demand. That's another factor. Add all this together, Wagner being a great player, the cards being very old, they're over 100 years old now. So that's why one of these cards once sold for $3.1 million at auction. There's only believed to be about 50 to 60 of these cards in existence today. The Hall of Fame is fortunate to have two of these cards. One is in our Shoebox Treasures exhibit, and the other is in our storage facility. So this is the most hotly desired, treasured baseball card, sometimes called the Holy Grail of baseball cards. Eventually, tobacco companies got out of the business of making baseball cards and including them with their product. In the 1910s, though, we saw other kinds of companies start to produce baseball cards. One of them was Cracker Jack. And I imagine some of you have had Cracker Jack treats, snacks, if you will. Not really a candy, it's more of a snack type food. Still popular to this day. So what Cracker Jack did was they started to include a baseball card in each box of Cracker Jack. They stuffed these cards into the boxes. They produced about 25 million of the cards. Here's one of them, a card for Hall of Fame outfielder Ty Cobb. And you can see, very colorfully done. They took a black and white photograph, they colorized it, nice red background, nice lettering. It's really quite a beautiful card. There was one problem with the card. These cards were produced on very thin cardboard stock. So when kids played with cards, and they did play with cards back then, the cards didn't last very long. They tended to break, they tended to fall apart. because of the lack of thickness to the cardboard stock. But now we see food companies, snack food companies, getting into the business of including baseball cards as an incentive to buy their food product. We then move to the 1930s. We start to see bubble gum companies have an association with baseball cards. Now, bubble gum, relatively new product. In fact, it was invented in the late 1920s. So the Fleer Company, which is one of the producers of bubble gum, they decide not only are we going to sell this new product, this bubble gum, but we're going to include baseball cards in the packaging. Now, at the time, companies like Fleer, they advertised chewing gum and bubble gum as a way to relax the nerves. If you're feeling tense, feeling nervous, you can chew gum. It's kind of a way to relieve tension. Also, they advertised chewing gum as a way to relieve heartburn as well. So bubble gum is relaxing, making it attractive to adults, but bubble gum is fun too, making it appealing to children. So they really had two different kinds of targets, if you will, adults and youngsters. And the baseball cards in particular were really sought after by the kids who liked bubble gum and also liked the idea of getting a free baseball card as a bonus. 1933, the Gowdy Gum Company out of Boston, Massachusetts, they decide that they're going to enter the fray. After Fleer, Gowdy becomes the second company to include gum within their packages of cards. Now, the Gowdy cards were a lot more attractive than the Fleer cards. Fleer, their cards didn't have a lot of design quality. They weren't particularly well done or attractive. But Gowdy, as you can see, they put some effort into it. They have some colorized photographs. So they took black and white photographs, colorized them. They also had, the red bar at the bottom, which says Big League Chewing Gum. That was the brand name they gave to the gum that they produced. And they had really a nice, attractive card. And these cards became a major, major hit, a major success. They're still collected to this day, and they're very highly desired by collectors of vintage baseball cards. We then move into the 1940s. In the 1940s, we see the desire to using photographs on baseball cards. Now, color photography was not yet really a major part of the technology at that time. So the photographs used on cards were essentially black and white photographs, like we see for two Hall of Famers here, Bill Dickey and Phil Rizzuto of the New York Yankees. Now, it was nice that they had a photograph of the player on the card, but because they're black and white and they're not colorized, and because they didn't have a lot of design quality, I mean, the Rizzuto card doesn't have anything except for the photo on it. The Bill Dickey card, it just has kind of a white banner at the bottom, but it's very simple. It's not very attractive. So these cards were not especially popular. There was another problem that hit the baseball card industry in the 1940s, and that was a problem that had to do with the war, a major problem, World War II, which begins in 1941, when America, or at least for America, that's when we entered the war. Now, the start of the war for America really forces American businesses and industry to change priority. Bubblegum manufacturers really have to halt production. Factory production is now going to be geared toward the war, making weaponry, other things to support the war effort. So bubblegum manufacturers, they are forced to halt production of gum, and as a result, halting production of baseball cards. So during the duration of the war, 1941 to 1945, people lose interest in baseball cards because they're just not being made. And bubble gum is not being made the way it once was. However, when the war comes to an end in 1945, well, bubblegum manufacturers now are free to start up again. The shortage of bubblegum and baseball cards comes to an end. By the end of the 1940s, there are 2.5 billion pieces of bubblegum in stores. And they're, of course, accompanied by the baseball cards. So with the war ending, we see a boom for the baseball card industry. And it continues into the 1950s. And in the 1950s, we see the card companies start to colorize the cards. So they take an existing black and white photograph, they put color onto it. They also do a little better job in terms of the design, make it more physically attractive to collectors. One of the companies that really starts to thrive in the 1950s is a company called the Bauman Company. And they actually develop a monopoly. They become the only gum company producing baseball cards with its product. All the other gum companies, they're still around, they're still producing gum, but they're not making baseball cards anymore. Bauman has developed a monopoly. They're the one company in the industry that's making baseball cards, including them as part of their product. And that monopoly would exist for a few years. It started in the late 40s, and then it continued into the early 50s. But in 1951, the Topps company decides, we are going to challenge Bauman. We are going to produce a set of baseball cards. So in 1951, we have the rather infamous redback and bluebacks Topps baseball cards. And it was a disaster of a set. The cards were not very attractive. They not only were baseball cards, but they were part of a game. And you can see each baseball card has a play that would result from a baseball game. So look at the card on the left for Gus Zernial. And if you turned up that card during the game, that would be a fly out. That would be a fly ball to one of the outfielders. The card for Ralph Branca on the right side simply produces a ball. You have balls and strikes, so it just produces a ball as part of the batting sequence. Well, the game was completely random, pretty boring. Kids did not like the game. And the cards were not very attractive either. As you can see, black and white photographs, these very bold red and orange and yellow colors. It didn't register with kids who were the primary audience for baseball cards. It was a disaster of a set. Nobody could have blamed Topps if they said, you know what, we're not doing this again. We're not going to make any more baseball cards. But to their credit, the Topps company did not give up. They decided to try again, and they mounted another challenge to Bauman in 1952. This was a newly redesigned baseball card. Two men worked on it, Sy Berger, an executive with Topps, and a man named Woody Gelman, who was the head of Topps art department. Together, they brainstormed, and they came up with a new design for cards, made the cards larger than the Bauman cards, these cards 2.5 by 3.5 inches, colorized photographs. They put the team logo on the front of the card. Underneath the player's name, they put a facsimile, a fake autograph, but it was based on the player's handwriting. And then on the back of the card, they had information about the player and statistics, his previous year's statistics. Well, these 1952 cards were so much better than the failed set, the redbacks and bluebacks of 1951. The 1952s became a huge hit, especially with the younger collectors, and it got Topps going in the right direction. Tremendous success. Topps would continue to produce cards each year. By 1958, Topps had developed a monopoly on baseball cards. So Bauman had the previous monopoly, but a few years later, Topps now has the monopoly. They're the only gum company producing baseball cards. Sticking with the 52 set for just a moment, Topps put out 407 cards, so their set was larger than the Bauman set. 1956, Topps buys out Bauman. So Topps now starts its monopoly, a monopoly that would exist all the way until 1981. By 1960, Topps has signed up almost every major league player. They've gotten permission to use the image of the player on the card. 414 out of 421 major league players signed up with the Topps company. So Topps is often right. They're producing bubble gum, but they're also producing baseball cards. And as it would turn out, the baseball cards would become a lot more popular than the bubble gum. Now here is a picture of the bazooka bubble gum that Topps produced. It was a hard stick of gum, very hard. And it would be within the pack of cards that you bought at maybe a pharmacy, drugstore, stationery store, that kind of a place, maybe a supermarket. So you'd buy a pack of cards and you'd get the one piece of gum. Well, I'm sure some of you out there, especially our older viewers, have tried this gum. It's not the best. It's hard and it's stale. In some cases, you didn't know how long that pack of cards was sitting on the shelf. It could have been there for months. So the gum was not all that good. Kids would chew it for a couple of minutes, it would lose its flavor, and then they would get rid of it. What the kids really wanted was the baseball cards. That became the thing. And this surprised Topps. They thought the main product was the gum, and the cards were just the incentive to buy the product of gum. Well, it reversed itself. The gum became kind of the throwaway item. The cards became the thing that collectors, especially young children, wanted to have. And that did surprise the Topps company. Now, you go back to the 1950s and 1960s, the way that people, especially children, and this would be elementary school children, even high school kids as well, they didn't just view cards as collectibles, something to preserve and maintain. They used them or viewed them as toys. One of the things kids used to do back in the 50s and 60s was they would take a hairpin clip, like what you see in these pictures here. They would clip the card to the bicycle spokes. So when the kids rode their bikes, the cards would make this kind of weird flapping noise, but it was kind of a cool sound. Made your bike sound really cool. Now, over time, it would ruin the cards, but kids didn't mind because they weren't buying the cards. They weren't getting them to preserve them and collect them for many years. The whole idea was to have fun with them. And a lot of times when that season ended, kids would, get rid of their cards and they'd wait for the new set of cards to come out. It's totally different back then. So cards are not just collectibles, they're toys. Another thing, and we did this in our neighborhood in the 1970s when I was growing up, we would flip cards. We would take cards, we would actually throw them up against the edge of the floor and the wall. If you got the card to lean up against the wall, that was considered the winner. All the other cards that were on the floor before then, you then got to take home with you. So the idea was to throw the card in such a way that it would balance against the wall and the floor, and you'd be the winner. Another thing that we did, and I tended to do this a lot with my friends in school, we would do kind of a matching game. So myself and another friend of mine, we would each have a stack of baseball cards. We would shuffle them. You would then put a card down. Your friend would then put a card on top. You would keep doing that. You would keep putting cards down until the border color on the card matched. So if my friend put down a card of, let's say, Roberto Clemente, and the main border color was, just say, red or black, whatever it might be. If I then put down a card for Willie Stargell, and that border color matched, if it was the same color as the Clemente card, then I got to take all of the cards in that stack. So you tried to match with the colors featured as part of the designs of the card. It's not done very often today. I kind of wish kids would go back to it because it's a lot of fun. Requires a lot of luck. You could lose your cards with bad luck, but with some good luck, you could take home some cards. But we had fun doing it. That was part of the lore, the fun of flipping the cards, matching the cards, even trading the cards as well. Now we move into the 1960s. Topps has the monopoly. They're the only gum company producing cards, and they're starting to make innovations. They make a transition from colorized photographs to full color photography. That's what we see here. They also start doing innovative things like featuring cards with more than one player. So the card on the left, for example, Buck Blasters, has 4 members of the Pittsburgh Pirates: Smokey Burgess, Dick Stewart, Roberto Clemente, and Bob Skinner. So if you're a Pirates fan, you want to get this card. Giant fans would like the card on the right, called Fence Busters. And they use these kind of funny headlines. They would group star players together, in this case, 2 great players, both Hall of Famers, Willie Mays and Willie McCovey. So the Fence Busters, that would be a great card to have, especially if you were a fan of the Giants. So Topps starting to do more and more creative things. They also improve the back of the cards. Not only do they show the previous year's statistics, that's what they did initially, but they would try to show a player's entire career, in some cases, his minor league statistics as well. This is for Doc Ellis, who was a pitcher with the Pittsburgh Pirates. So his complete major and minor league record is shown on the back of the card. There's a paragraph in the upper left-hand corner. It's a short bio on Doc Ellis. They have some basic information on Ellis: height, weight, where he was born, does he bat left, throw right, that sort of thing. And then they would also include a cartoon. Some of the cartoons were pretty goofy, some were kind of funny and amusing, but most of the cards had some kind of a cartoon on the back of it. So they're putting a lot of effort into the back of the card in addition to the photo on the front. Interesting development. 1969. Baseball players, up until the late 1960s, did not get a lot of money for the use of their image. When a ball player first came up, Sy Berger from the Topps company would go up to him, usually at the spring training camps in Florida or Arizona, and he would approach the player and he would talk to the player about the possibility of signing up with Topps. And they wouldn't give the player a lot of money for the rights to use his image, about $5. Now, when that young player did eventually make the major leagues, and it might not happen for a year, 2 years, 3 years, but when that player did make the major leagues, he would then get about $125 each time, each year he appeared on a Topps card. That was not a lot of money. Not back then, certainly not today. Marvin Miller, who became the head of the Players Association in 1965, thought the players were being taken advantage of. So what he did for a couple of years, back in 1968 and 69, is he told the players, do not pose for any more photographs with the Topps company until they come up with a better deal for us. So that is what they ended up doing. And that put pressure on Topps to improve the amount of money that they would give for the rights to use the player images. And this really helped. This was really one of the first licensing agreements the Players Association put together. And it has brought in much more income for the players than that initial $5 for signing up and $125 each time your photo ended up on a baseball card. But if you look at some of the cards from 1968 and 69, you'll see a lot of the player shots have no cap, or the cap is generic. In many cases, these are photographs that were 2 or 3 years old simply because the players were refusing to pose for new photographs until they got the better deal. That happened by 1970, and the practice of using the old photographs kind of went by the wayside. Early 1970s, action cards. This is when I started collecting. Baseball cards throughout the 50s and 60s, they were almost all posed photographs. taken before the game. Player's got a bat in his hand. He's pretending to swing away, pretending to bunt, pretending to use his glove to field a ball that's not there. So these were all kind of staged photographs. They didn't really have action shots. That changed in 1971. By the early 70s, high-speed cameras now allowed photographers to take photos during the game from long distances away. And prior to this, they would have taken a photograph and players are moving, would have been very blurry. But the high-speed photograph makes game action photography a possibility. So in 1971, Topps produced a number of cards showing players in action, like Thurman Munson, one of my favorites from the New York Yankees. So we see a player for the Oakland A's sliding into home plate during a game at Yankee Stadium. Well, for young baseball card collectors like me, this was huge, so exciting to finally see players in action instead of all those hokey posed portrait shots. 1972, Topps realized it's got a good thing. So on every action card that they put out, they put a special red frame, they put the words "in action," and then they had the actual action photograph occupying the majority of the card. Kids love this. I love this. And this became very popular. For those of you who collect baseball cards today, almost all the photographs are action shots. But that was not the case prior to 1971 and 72. In 71 and 72, this was a new trend, and it did become a huge hit with collectors. Another thing we start to see with baseball cards in the early 70s, they start to reflect fashion and grooming styles of the era. Look back to some of those players in earlier cards. Look at Tommy Harper on the right. He has a very short haircut, close cropped on the side. It's not long hair. It's not what you would call a large afro for an African-American player. But as we move into the early 70s, that's starting to change. African-American players growing their afros out larger. Other players growing their hair longer, in some cases shoulder-length hair. Jim Grant, Mudcat Grant, former pitcher who has come to Cooperstown many times, true friend of the Hall of Fame, used to wear these mutton chop sideburns. You never would have seen these in the 50s or 60s. Just wasn't done in baseball. It's a very conservative sport. But now the players are starting to express themselves. Longer hair, larger hairdos, mutton chop sideburns, beards, mustaches. And you see that in the way they look on the baseball cards. Here is perhaps the most famous mustache in baseball history, Raleigh Fingers. He developed a handlebar mustache. He actually applied wax to the edges, the tips of the mustache, to make them curl up. And this became a huge thing. It became his trademark. In fact, later in his career, he refused to sign a contract with the Cincinnati Reds because the Reds had a no facial hair policy. And they said, well, we'll sign you, Raleigh, but you got to shave your mustache. Well, the mustache was his trademark. It was how he was known. Raleigh said, I can't do it. I've got to keep the mustache on. And here we see that mustache after he had signed a free agent contract with the San Diego Padres. You can see some of the African-American players let their afros grow much larger. These two guys were at the top of the list, Oscar Gamble and Jose Cardenal. So baseball players no longer looking as conservative as they once did, and the baseball cards reflect that kind of a change. Also, the uniforms start to become different in the 1970s. You go back to the 50s and 60s, most teams, they wore white at home, gray on the road. In the 1970s, we start to see gold and black. Those were the Bumblebee uniforms, the black and gold for the Pittsburgh Pirates. The Oakland A's go to green and gold. We see some teams introduce red or maroon. So the uniforms themselves become more colorful. That is reflected on the baseball cards. This is Hall of Famer Willie Stargell on the 1979 top set representing the Pittsburgh Pirates. We also see the borders of the cards start to change. They used to be, for the most part, white. We now start to see the introduction of multicolors, in this case, kind of a purple and a lavender. In the 1970s, color was a big thing. This was very popular. Baseball cards start to reflect that. Now, I talked earlier about that Topps monopoly. It started in 1956 when they bought out Bauman. Well, the monopoly comes to an end. Two companies, they challenged Topps. Specifically, the Fleer Company filed a lawsuit in 1976, basically saying that the Topps monopoly was not fair, that it was un-American. This is not what a capitalist society should have. Well, it took a few years, but eventually the courts ruled in favor of Fleer. By 1981, Major League Baseball and the Players Association are both ordered to allow at least two other companies to produce baseball cards in addition to Topps. So in 1981, we now have three card companies producing their own sets: Topps, Donruss, and Fleer. This is a great thing for the consumer, for the card collector. Topps, as much as I love Topps cards, they had gotten a little bit set in their ways. They had maybe taken things for granted. The quality of their cards had fallen off because they had no competition. Now in the early 80s, they have two other companies directly competing against them. So they have to do a better job, and they have to identify their cards. They now put Topps right on the front of the card. They feature more action shots, better photography. In the case of the 1983 set shown here, two photos on the front of the card. So as we move through the 1980s, Topps cards are getting better, and it's because of the competition from Donruss and Fleer. Now, as we move into the 1980s, more and more companies got into the business of making baseball cards. It got to the point where they just flooded the market. So many companies are producing cards that the cards almost become, well, I don't want to say worthless, but they start to lose some value because there's so many cards being produced by so many different companies. It becomes almost impossible to buy all of the cards. For years, there was kind of a belief that if you collected cards and you took care of them, kept them in nice condition, you could sell them later on. What we saw was, because of this glut of cards, the overproduction of cards, that even if you took care of the cards, they didn't really gain much value over time. That's why a lot of the cards from the late 1980s and early 1990s, even if they're nice cards for great players, haven't really gone up much in value. Now, there's still this effort, though, to keep cards in better condition. By the early 1990s, we start to see almost an obsession with the condition of the cards. No longer are kids flipping cards, putting them in bicycle spokes. Now they're putting them in plastic. Now they're putting them in albums to protect the card. Here we have an example of a card that has been graded. And it's a system: 0 is the worst, 10.0 is the best grade. This card has actually been graded, put into a plastic sleeve, and has been graded a perfect card. It is considered 10.0 gem mint. So if you're looking to sell a card, Ivan Rodriguez from the 1991 Topps Traded set, the way to maximize the amount of money you can get back is to keep that card in as good a condition as possible. And there's lots of things that go into effect here. It's the quality of the photograph. Is there any smudging on the card? Is the card perfectly centered? Are the borders even? All those things are factored in. Very hard to find a card that's gem mint, even brand new out of a package, especially back in the late 80s and early 90s. But if you did, if you had a card like this and you wanted to sell it, you could then probably get a little bit more money in doing so. As we move into the 1990s, chase cards start to become a big thing. Companies like Topps, other companies, Upper Deck, they start to put special insert cards into their packs. These are considered premium cards. Here's one example of that. Mike Schmidt, his 1973 Topps card has been reproduced, but also added on to it is a piece of his uniform, authentic game-worn jersey from his rookie season, 1973. That has actually been added onto the card. So what this company did, what Topps did, is they took a Mike Schmidt uniform. They literally cut it up into hundreds, if not thousands of pieces. They put each piece of the uniform onto the card. This became a premium card that everybody wanted to have. This was the incentive for fans, collectors, to try to get this card. Now, there's no guarantee. You buy a pack of cards, maybe you get a chase card like this, a premium card, maybe you don't. But just the possibility made a lot of people, especially youngsters, want to buy more packs of cards. Let's talk about baseball cards and the language that they have. If you're around baseball card people like me, you'll hear us use certain terms. Some of them are shown here. A common card. That is a term used to describe the card of a player who is not a star. He might be a good player. He might be a starting second baseman for a good team, but he's not considered an all-star. He's not a great player. He's not a future Hall of Famer. So we call that a common card. Then we have an error card. And this is a card that contains a mistake. Player's name might be misspelled. Sometimes the wrong player is identified on a card. There's a famous card of Al Leiter, the pitcher, late 1980s. Says Al Leiter on the card. It's actually a picture of another minor league player for the Yankees named Steve George. It was a mistake made by the photographer. He got the wrong photograph of the wrong player. So error cards can happen. A ding has to do with condition. It's a term used to describe damage to the card when it is creased or dented. You drop a card on the floor, it hits the corner of the card, it's a ding. It is slightly damaged. And then we have a gloss, and that is a card with a luster or a shiny finish. These kinds of cards have become very popular starting in the 1990s, continuing to today. You see some cards that have a gold finish or a bronze finish. You hold them, they're thicker than the normal cardboard. They have a special gloss used on the front surface of the card. So baseball cards have their own language. Baseball it has its own language as well. Let's look at some phrases from baseball. Phrases that started with the game itself that have now become part of our everyday conversation. Things like knock one out of the park or take one for the team. These have become part of our American culture. You can be sitting around at school one day. Hopefully, I'll be back in school in the fall. You're talking, and all of a sudden you use a phrase, like one of these phrases, that really comes from baseball, but it applies to a real-life, everyday situation. I'm such a baseball fan that I say these things without even realizing that I'm drawing them from baseball, but that's where they started. We're going to show you some examples of that, and we're going to test the ability of some of our students out there. So we're going to start with this first multiple choice question. In baseball, this is one of 3 outfield positions. In everyday speech, it is a source of strange or sudden events. What do we call that? First base, shortstop, or left field? Which of those positions, baseball positions, matches up? Something happens unexpectedly. We say that it happens out of first base, out of shortstop, or out of left field. Which is the right answer? Well, it's out of left field. So in baseball, it's one of the 3 outfield positions. In everyday speech, it is a source of strange or sudden events. You might say, yeah, I was talking with my friend, and then all of a sudden, she started talking about something else that had nothing to do with what our conversation was. She just brought that up out of left field. That's what that means. That comes from baseball, that term, but we're using it in everyday conversation. Let's do a couple more. When a batter is hit by a pitch, he or she gets to go to first base. This expression means to do something painful that can help the whole group. What do we call that? Do we say that's hold serve? Do we say cry me a river? Or do we say take one for the team? Expression that means to do something painful that can help the whole group. I see several of our listeners and watchers joining in. It is, yes, take one for the team. You are right. When a batter is hit by a pitch, he or she gets to go to first base. But the expression also means to do something painful that can help the whole group. and that means take one for the team. It's kind of making a sacrifice, basically. So let's say, for example, you have chores at home. And on Tuesday night, normally your sister has to take the garbage out, but your sister is sick. She's in bed. So your parents say to you, well, you know, your sister, she's not feeling so good. Can you take out the garbage, take one for the team, make a sacrifice, help us out? That's what that means. Again, it starts with baseball, but it applies to everyday life. We'll do one more. This means to step in and take another player's turn at bat. It also means to fill in for somebody. Is it A, a sacrifice, which we just talked about? Is it B, a warm-up? Or C, is it pinch hit? Which of these three would it be? And several of you have chipped in or chimed in with the right answer. It is C, pinch hit. It means to step in and take another player's turn at bat, but it also means to fill in for somebody. So, for example, let's talk about a presentation you're going to make at school. Maybe it's a group presentation, and you and several other kids are working on it. One of you was designated to be the presenter, to verbally present the ideas of the group, but that person is sick, not in school that day. Somebody else has to kind of step in and pinch hit for that intended presenter. That's an example of using that term in everyday conversation. Starts with baseball, but again, it applies to real life. All right, that is our program. Popular culture through baseball cards and language. Want to leave just a couple of minutes here. If you have questions for me, and you can certainly pose those questions in our chat room while we're waiting for those. Want to remind you about our baseball card exhibit up on the third floor, Shoebox Treasures. When our museum opens, we hope that is going to be coming up very soon. Don't know exactly when, but hopefully sometime this summer. One of the exhibits we encourage you to visit is Shoebox Treasures. A lot of what I've talked about today will be familiar to you, but you'll also learn a lot more about the history of the hobby of baseball card collecting. Any questions in our chat room? If you have a question, go to the chat box, Zoom group chat, and I'll do my best to answer the question about what we've talked about today, about the Hall of Fame, about other exhibits in our museum. Great question from Gunnar. Do you have Nolan Ryan's rookie card? Well, Gunnar, when you say you, I assume you mean the Baseball Hall of Fame, and we do. We do have Nolan Ryan's rookie card. I want to say it's from about 1968, in that area, maybe 1969. I don't have it personally in my collection, but yes, I have seen that card in the Hall of Fame's collection. We don't have every baseball card ever produced. That'd be difficult to do, but we have over 200,000, and the Nolan Ryan rookie is one of those cards. Question from Max. Who are some of the players that did not sign with Topps when it started growing in popularity? That's a great question, Max. There were a handful of players that did not sign with Topps. One of them you probably heard of, Ted Williams. Ted Williams was not happy with the terms that Topps made to him. And actually, at one point, he went to another company which did a limited edition set. They didn't do a full set because Topps had the monopoly on Major League players, but they did a small Ted Williams set. I think it might have been the Fleer Company in the early 60s. So there were a few years where there were not Ted Williams Topps cards. So he is one example. I know in later years, Maury Wills, great shortstop for the Dodgers, for some years, he did not have any cards with Topps. He did not sign. Rusty Staub, the late Rusty Staub, great player for the Expos and Mets, among other teams. There were a period of years where he did not sign with Topps. Maybe not happy with the contractual terms. Maybe they got a better offer. Although in the case of Staub and Wills, I don't believe their cards were being produced by any other company. They simply did not agree with what Topps had to offer. So it was up to them, their choice to say no. And that is what they did. I'll take one more question from Armando. Which card from your collection do you cherish the most and why? That's a great question, Armando. Those who know me know that my favorite player of all time is Roberto Clemente. And it's become my favorite card of all time. It's his 1972 Topps card. I don't have an image of it in this presentation, but it came out during his final season. It's not his final card. They actually produced a card in '73 after he passed away in the plane crash. But in 1972, his last year as an active ball player, there were two cards. One was an action card, an in-action card, and then the other was the regular card. And I like that regular card. I like that year to begin with. That's the first year I collected cards, 1972. You can see the Mudcat Grant here on the screen. That's from that same set. I love the colored frame and the kind of funky lettering used at the top for the team name. But I love the photograph of Clemente. It's Clemente before a game at Shea Stadium, and he's just flipping a ball up in the air very casually. You see the ball in midair. You see his hand at the bottom of the photograph. It's just kind of a cool card of him flipping the ball in the air. I don't know if it was his idea or Topps's idea to do that, but it just looks really cool to me. He was my favorite player. It turned out 1972 was his last season, although not his last card. So that's my favorite card. It's not necessarily the most valuable card that I have, but it's my most cherished because it's a great player. It's the year I started collecting, and it's just a really neat photograph as well. Great questions from Armando and the others. I want to thank everybody for joining us for today's program. Reminder that we'll have more programs coming your way next week, including our second installment of our trivia, which we debuted yesterday, went very well. So we'll have another installment of So You Think You Know Baseball, among other programs that we'll be featuring through our virtual field trips from Cooperstown, site of the National Baseball Hall of Fame. Thank everybody for joining us. We hope you enjoyed pop culture through baseball cards and language. Have a great day, everybody.